we're starting the halachos of Pas and Bishul Akum, Siman Kufi Beis, and just to help put things into perspective, the Siman Kufi Beis is organized very neatly into 3 groups. Okay, there are 16 halachos, and the first half of them are about when the Isser of Bishul Akum should apply. Like, for example, Pas Akum should apply, like Pas Palter, what happens, which foods are included. It's very neat, those first half of the Siman. The next quarter of the Siman, the next 4 halachas, is how you make Pas Yisrael. And the last 4 halachas, are what about if you want to mix and you cross Pas Yisrael and eat at someone's house who doesn't have Pas Yisrael, you use kalim and things like that. The last 4 are those kind of halachas. So it's very neatly broken into 3 groups. Okay, I'm going to read through the din. We're really going to talk more about the beginning, but I'll read through the whole din. The Chachams made an Isser to eat the bread of Goyim, Mishum Chasnus, so as to prevent Chasnus. And the Ramah says, also. Even if there's no Chash of Chasnus, it's also. We're going to come back to all this. I just want to finish. The whole Isser is on the bread made of the Chamishas Minidagim, meaning if you made of something, rice bread or something like that, there would no Isser Pas. Our Pasha kidney, so Irreligious Jews, it's not included in that Isser, and the Ramah sticks in that there's now like an unspoken comment, which is potentially, since it's not Pas, it potentially is in the Isser of Bishul Akum. Okay, so the Ramah sticks in, but you should just know, things that are not included in the Isser of Pas Akum all fall into the potential Isser of Bishul Akum, but this one happens to not have it. It may not oil Shulchan Machim. If Pas Oil and kidneys is not oil Shulchan Machim, which everyone says it's not, at least in their times it was not. So it was not oil Shulchan Machim, so it's not Bishul Akum. And the main point of the Machaber was that one of the rules to get into the Isser of Pas Akum is it has to be made of the Chameshus Minidagim. Okay, so since it was not made from the Chameshus Minidagim, so it's not included. Okay, now most of that detail of what is and is not, we're going to talk about later. It's not.
But it has nothing to do with oil Shulchan Malachim.
Yes, the word is
correct.
That's exactly what I wanted to say.
But if it's because of Chasnus, so why shouldn't we apply the same thing?
Okay, so that's exactly what I wanted to say. Prima Golden points out right on this slide is that you see from here that the rules of what is or is not Pas Yisrael has nothing to do with oil Shulchan Malachim. Because when talked about Bishul, that's when the Ramah says, oh, but you should know in the game whether it's oil Shulchan Malachim. But for Pas, it's not yet. Okay, which is
that's what Pas Akum is also only for Shulchan Malachim.
Right. So that's what I'm saying about Fouquet, that it's everyone assumes that it's generally accepted that
the Hainim must hold to it, because he said he over the Sarkei, so something about certain cereal. I think it's not on the Shulchan Malachim.
Right, because cereals are usually not Pas. Usually treated as.
I don't know, it's Pas. It was Pas. He was going that it's Pas, but his mutter does not know. It's not Pas Akum. It's not Shulchan Malachim.
So we can find out what that is, but that's not. It's generally accepted, and here's our first example of it. It's generally accepted that the rule, those kulas of Eno Shulchan Malachim and Nechachai do not apply to Pas. We're going to see more about that later. Okay, but here's just one like simple. It's like right here, like right in the first in the riot from the Ramah. Pretty much brings up this right.
Nechachai doesn't apply to it.
Nechachai.
There's no Messias.
Okay, well we could talk about that, but it's not yet. We will see more about. I shouldn't say not yet. We will see more about it later. It's they get to dinner. What did you say? But it's more. They get to dinner that come. It's they get to dinner that going to come up with. Okay. Now the main part I want to talk about is the beginning. What the Mechaber says that the Isser is Mishum Chasnus. Okay, and the Torah starts off. This Siman starts off by saying that the halachas of Pas Akum, that's this Siman, Bishul Akum, that's the next Siman, and that you're not allowed to drink with Goyim, you're not allowed to drink alcoholic beverages, certain ones, that's the Siman afterwards, Kufital. Those 3 halachas are all Chazal made up to prevent intermarriage. That's what he says. And his words are that these eating and drinking together is Moshchem Leifa Adam, V'miskar V'aleim V'echem Elu, Yovel Eschak. If you'll eat and drink together with Goyim under these specific conditions, it potentially could lead to intermarriage. So Chazal said you shouldn't do it.
Doesn't someone speak out also? I'm sorry that this is also on the presumption that we're not dealing with any Kashrus issues.
Yes.
That,
yeah.
No, I'm saying
yes.
No. Everybody's talking about what about God? They
yes.
speak it out.
Everybody speaks out. That it's the reason why.
Speak it out.
Wait a second. How you?
Why don't you worry about Kashrus?
Speak it out. Everyone does. Everyone. It's correct. Everyone speaks out that the reason why you're allowed to eat it is because This part they don't say, but the bread is assumed to just be plain, straightforward
Bread,
flour,
flour,
water.
water, sure.
And the kalim, we say stam kalim, and the
Yeah.
many people point that out. Yes, so we assume the kalim are not being used for other things, and that's correct. Okay, so we're going to take that as straightforward as it is, which is to say that these isurim that we're going to speak about are isurim because of chasnus. Okay, in fact, the Gemara says that the isur is if you read the Gemara all the way through, the Gemara says like this: these things are asur because of yichud. You may come to have yichud with a guy if you'll do these things, and yichud is also because you might come to do avodah zarah. Okay, because you might lead you to avodah zarah. The yichud itself is in itself also because you might come to avodah zarah. So, and in fact, if you read the words of the Mechaber, what does the Mechaber say? Asur chachamim lecha pashal amimim avdei kachavim. He sounds like he's limiting to people who are Oived Avodah Zarah, because those people you might come to Yichud, and you then might come to Avodah Zarah. If you eat with an atheist, how are you going to come by eating with him? Okay, so that's a possibility. You mean that he only means like, okay, we're going to talk about a mummer in a second. I mean, maybe he means it, that's what we're talking about. I'm coming to that. You see, maybe he says, Amamim Avdei Kachavim. Maybe he means Amam Avdei Kachavim Lafuke, but Yisroel Avdei Kachavim. Okay, I didn't figure that point. But maybe that is. But the Shach, if you look at the Shach, on those words, Avdei Kachavim, the Shach says, I am with Kaman, Reishim, Kuf Chav Gimel, and Kuf Yud Chav Dalet, Sivkat, and whatever. What's that? That's in the halachas of Stam Yain. And halachas of Stam Yain, Mir Hadin, Stam Yain is also Bahana. But since the Goyim nowadays are not Avdei Avodah Zarah, or most of them are not Avdei Avodah Zarah, therefore, Stam Yain is only also B'Shtia. It's not also Bahana nowadays. And that's in the beginning Kuf Chav Gimel, and that's the Shach of Kuf Chav Dalet, Yudei, which is a Mechaber in Kuf Chav Dalet. That since they're not Avdei Avodah Zarah, therefore, their things are not Asur Bahana. Meaning, we take into consideration that he's not Avdei Avodah Zarah, so it doesn't have certain strictnesses that would go along with that kind of a din. So the Abnei says that what the Shach means to say is, if you have Amamim that are not Avdei Kachavim, then there won't be this Pasakim. That's what he says. Now the Abnei says he doesn't agree with it, and the Pri Megadim on this Shach says that's not true. He doesn't say that he thinks that that's what the Shach is trying to say, but he brings a whole bunch of people who say even if the Goyim are not Avdei Avodah Zarah, these Isurim still apply, which is what we assume. We go with that assumption. I'm just saying is that the Mechaber doesn't sound like that. The Gemara doesn't sound like that. The Gemara says it also because of Avodah Zarah, and the Shach has that leaning. Okay, I'm not gonna. I'm not going to tell you what he says, but there's a biur in the Chalkas Binyamin about this to try to be miyashiv why he's not talking about the Shach so much, but he's being miyashiv why the everyone says that it's because of Chasnus when the Gemara says that's not. The Gemara uses the word Chasnus, but then the Gemara says it means yichud, and the Gemara says what's wrong with yichud, and the Gemara says yichud is also because of Avodah Zarah. That's what the Gemara says. Okay, now the Ramah says
Where's more?
Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Now, the Ramah says that even if there's no chasnus, still there's an issue of pasakim. Now, so what does that mean? How does there no issue of chasnus? So the person have a field day of cases of where there should not be a potential chasnus. Like for example, what happens if he has no children? Or what happens if he's single? Or the Shach says, what happens if he's a celibate priest? So he's B'shita never going to get married. So he can't have any chasnas because he can't marry his daughter. He's B'shita never going to get married. Or what happens? The Pri Megadim says, what happens if he's a prince? And prince, they don't mix with the common folk. So you would never marry his daughter. They got a whole bunch of
He wouldn't own a bakery either.
He what?
He wouldn't own a bakery either.
No, when up to bakery, he gave you a cake. His wife baked you a cake. So the thing is, so they have a whole pack of cases. The Ramah is saying is, even if there's no chasnas, it's asur. And the Shach says that's because, the Shach says it this way, he says, the reason why it's asur is because, the point is that it's asur, pasakim was asur, because of chasnas. But he doesn't have a daughter, his friend has a daughter, that's how he says it. The Taz says in a way that's easier for us to get, which is that it's one talk. Once a chacham asur, the pasakim, the reason was because of chasnas. But if this guy happens to not have a daughter, or he's 98 years old and he's not going to have any more children, doesn't make a difference. That's not a reason to not answer it. Because what Chacham answered in no case. Okay. And that leads us to where we're...
Could we say also that Chasnus doesn't mean actual marriage, but it means assimilation?
It means assimilation?
That means that you're assimilating with the Goyish society. You know, you're you're intermingling with them, and you're
That's always
have to be
drinking.
mamish, then you're going to get
That's
married.
not Mishnah more.
The reason why I question that is because this Gemara that said that because of Avodah Zarah, the Gemara says, when it has different ideas of what the issue might be, it says, for that kind of an issue, we wouldn't have an example. When it is just mingling with Goyim, and just being more friendly with them, might not be enough to answer it until if we really consider Chasnus. You know, like intermarriage is like a very serious line. You know what I'm saying? To say you might become friends with him and go to the ball game with him. That I don't know that at the, you know what I mean? At the point of saying that it's
I hear you.
I don't. Maybe you read something more serious. Maybe you said the word assimilation. You meant more serious in the sense of like abandoning of doing mitzvahs or like that.
It's going to happen.
That's what you meant. Okay.
That's what you're going to start going with ball games.
Right. So maybe that you mean it assimilation, not just be friends with them, but assimilation to the point of like completely stop. Okay. So
It wouldn't be
maybe.
business dealings.
Maybe that's what the Lord means when it comes to Avodah Zarah.
Let me see how it's
Within
Mishnah
the-
Zocher. Something like that over there.
The Gemara, that's later in the Gemara talks about those kind of things also. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. No. It's in the later Gemara, right after that, other Xeris that they made.
In general, so the Chachamim did
Right.
wine. Why did they only do wine? Why not alcohol?
So in Kufi Dalet, the next thing is that there are Isur things that you're not allowed to eat, drink together with guys. That's drinking at a bar. So certain kind of things like that. Now, if we ever get there, that's to exactly figure out which things you're not allowed to, but it includes alcohol type beverages. It's not to take it from them. The Isur is to eat it together. That's the way they structured that Isur. It's not that their alcohol is also, but then you don't drink together. And at bars, I mean, it's like, what else brings up images of guys, hanging out together and becoming good friends is a bar. I mean, we don't need to do that. Okay. So we're headed to is, the Shiloh is like this. A Shiloh Nachranim is, what happens if the person who cooked, what David mentioned before, if the person who cooked the food was a Yid, but he was a Yisroel Mumar. Okay? He was a Yid who is not he's Machal Shabbos for Hesser. So what should we say? Should that food be mutter us? Okay,
You're talking about pas, or you're talking
pas. We're talking about pas. We're learning halachos pas.
Okay.
So I'm sorry. I mean pas. And the simple thing to say would be is, well, for halachos in the beginning of your day it says that a person who's a mumar Machal Shabbos for Hesser, that person is considered a mumar and he's considered ka'akum. And for many dinim he's considered like an akum. So his food should be asur. Okay, which brings up just a side thing. It's just funny because it can't be true. But the shiloh is what the guy's going to eat because he can't cook his own food. Because if he cooks his food, then it's pas and bishalakum. He can't eat it. Right? If we make him into a mummer, so he's not allowed to eat his own food. You have to ask someone to cook for him.
He's not that from.
Drink wine.
Right? He can drink wine also. Right?
He's not that from.
Okay, right. So whatever the answer is, okay, it's just a funny question. Okay. So anyhow, so the Pesach Tshuva. Oh, I know. Okay. Okay. The Pesach Tshuva brings from a sefer called Teferes LaMoshe. Okay. And Rabbi Moskowitz will fill us in on who that is.
First LaMoshe.
Teferes LaMoshe. But thankfully, we'll put in a plug for HebrewBooks.org. Is that what they call? Which I downloaded safe from there, so I can finally look the safer up. And he says,
So who brings this down?
the Pesach Tshuva right here brings down that the Teferes LaMoshe says, the way he brings it is, the Gzeira is Mishum Chasnus. There's no Isser to marry the Mumar's daughter.
No.
The Mumar's daughter is a Jewish girl. You're allowed to marry her. So therefore, since there's no Chasnus to marry her, so the pas of Yisroel Mumar is mutter. Okay? Now, really, the Teferes LaMoshe says a little bit more than that. Okay? What the Teferes LaMoshe says is like this. He says, there's two reasons why pas and bishul akum might be usher. One is mishum chasnus, and one is shamiach chilenu davar tamei. You're cautious that maybe he'll mix something in. He's a guy who's cooking the food, maybe he'll mix something in. So he says, so now I don't know where this comes from, but he says, pas is only mishum chasnus, and bishul akum is mishum chasnus and mishum shamiach chilenu davar tamei. Is what's the nafkamina? The nafkamin is if a mumar does it. If it's because Shem Yachlem Davar Tamei, the mumar is just as choshev to give you tray food as the guy is. If it's just because of chasnus, then there's no problem of chasnus to the mumar, and therefore he says pas akum does not apply to Yisroel mumar who cooks, and bishul akum does. Okay? And which is reflected in the Pesach Tshuva. This Pesach Tshuva says that the Teferes LaMoshe says that pas akum is mutter. The pas akum of a mumar is mutter, and the first Pesach Tshuva in Kuf Yud Gimel says that the Teferes LaMoshe says that bishul akum of Yisroel mumar is usher, and there are even people who won't like, well, how can it be pas is mutter and bishul is usher? And the reason he says is because the Teferes LaMoshe says is because for here the only Isser is chasnus, and over there it's chasnus and sham yachler davar tamei. That's why it is. Okay, so
But even if it's it would apply, because Shem Yachlan and David Tamar, Bishul Akum, but it would have to be that he's a mumar in a way that makes him ka'akum. Right? Not just, sometimes say someone's a mumar l'tayavur, he eats drink. You can't help the
I agree. Yes. So that's why I said that's why I said mumar l'chal Shabbos. That's what he uses the example, mumar l'chal Shabbos. Right? A person, I don't really get all those details, but right, a mumar l'tayavur will depend on what he's choshed for. If he's choshed for treif, you might not have to be choshed or feed you treif. You know,
yeah, I know, but it wouldn't be Bishul Akum though.
Right.
Let's say I know in this case it's kosher, it wouldn't be...
Okay, well, that's its own question. How much those didn't spread to each other, that's good. But I'm talking about a mumar l'chal Shabbos, he's a plain old, good old fashioned mumar. Okay, so the what's the reason to argue on the translation? Why do others say not like that? Why would they say the cooking of a mumar would be usher, the baking of a mumar would be usher? So it's very simple. What we've just been saying was that there's a light plug. Chachamim said that it's usher when an akum cooks, an akum bakes food for you. That food is usher. Even, for example, if he doesn't have any children, even maybe if he's not over avodah zarah. So another person who has the rules of an akum, he's like an akum imor. Okay, he's legally considered an akum. Right? See, the akum imor, this guy has also the name of an akum. So the fact that there's no issue of chasnus, in a sense, makes him no different than the priest, who also has no problem with chasnus because he has no kids. Okay, so it's the same idea. They're both the same. That will be the reason to argue. Okay, the Abnei Nezer that's how most people argue. The Abnei Nezer has his own twist, and he says, the reason why it's usher is because, he says, what do you think the kids of a mumar are going to be like? He says, what do you think they're going to be? In the summer, they're going to go in their father's footsteps. So you're not allowed to marry them either. Not because he doesn't mean you're not allowed to marry them because of the Yisroel of an akum. He means it's because it's not appropriate. So that's his own twist of it. It's because it's like usher. Okay, it's like usher to marry them. Right, he doesn't. Right, that means it goes after the father, right? Oh, okay. So anyhow, but most people would say that because of loy plug. It would be loy plug. If this guy's considered an akum, then for halachas, for whatever reasons he's considered akum, this is a din of an akum, he should have that din also. Okay, what's the rayas not like that? What are the rayas that it should be usher? Sorry, the rayas against the Tiferes HaMoshe. So one is, there's a din in Hilchos Stam Yain, which says, it's a Beferish din, that says that the Mechaber Kuf Chaf Dalet says that the wine of a mumar is usher to drink. Okay? What is that? Why is the wine of a mumar usher to drink? The reason why we're not allowed to drink stam yain, as we said, nowadays you're not allowed to drink stam yain is because of chasnus. So the mumar, and it says there that you're not allowed to drink the wine, if you saw a mumar touch the wine, so then it's because of chasnus. You're not allowed to drink it, even though that isser is be'etzem and isser chasnus. Okay? And there's a Ran who speaks it out of Chulun like the Farish. He says, even though nowadays the isser of Stam Yain is Mishum Chasnus, and the Yisroel Mumar, there's no Isser of Chasnus, much like the words of the first one, there's no Isser of Chasnus. But even so, I don't know if he uses the word like plug or something to that effect of, too bad, that's the way the Isser is on all Akum. This guy has the din of an Akum, so his Stam Yain is going to be us.
That's not for Shalach about Mumar.
That's by Stam Yain, it's in Kuf Chatal, it's a Perish din. So, Rav Belsky said back to that he thinks it's a special, that's a Chumrah for Stam Yain. He doesn't think that that's the din. And Rebelsky's whole sheet about this is coming from Rav Moshe. He says he heard it from Moshe, but there's also two very short tshuvas about it from Moshe. It's in passing in two tshuvas from Rav Moshe. And Rav Moshe seems to say the same kind of thing also, that it's a special chumrah for Moshe. Rav Moshe says something like min hadin, I believe it's mutter. A mummer in all these cases is mutter. And this, that we're knowing to be machmir by Stam Yain, like that's not a raya, and I'm not going to explain to you what.
So let me ask you, the Hefsa Meruba, with a mummer of a guy that touched it.
Mummer of
a mummer, you saw a mummer.
You saw a mummer.
If it's a chumrah, is there yesh lahakol in any type for a Hefsa Meruba?
I can't believe people would. I don't know what to tell you.
We find that many, where it's a Hefsa Meruba, we're machmer.
Okay, in this case, I mean,
correct.
In this case,
the machmer here.
The machmer and the money.
Right, machmer the money. Is there any yesh lahakol by a mummer?
I wouldn't say that. It's a fair shit in there. This is
if it's a chumrah ba'alma.
You have to know what it means. I mean, I think it's more than just a machmer.
So then it's mutter.
Ramesh surely
says
I think that's within Ramesh, I think that for all these dinim, a mummer is not considered, doesn't have those rules of an akum. He says, and this, and he used the word, we're machmir by Stam Yain, he says something like that's different, or I'm not going to tell you why. Okay, and Rav Belsky said it as it's a special chumrah for Stam Yain.
when he talks about the companies, by the Jewish-owned companies, he said.
He's talking about.
He said if the employees are Jewish, that's kosher no harm, why should be also anyway? So therefore you can make it a company.
I don't remember that.
Why?
That part. Maybe that's maybe they also. Okay. So maybe you're seeing something else. Maybe I just don't remember. I saw it yesterday, or the day before. I don't remember. Okay. So
that's the companies.
Okay. And really the truth is about what is for him is about Cholov Yisroel. I think it was Cholov or Gvinas Yisroel. I forgot which one it was. That's what the real truth about it. Whether who has to own it. Like that's what the real truth is about. Okay. The other raya that people bring, I've seen people bring, is from Prima Gordon. Prima Gordon, really he's talking about a guy who's not over the Zara, but there are things that the Prima Gordon says that give the implication that he even includes a Yisroel Mumar in that also. The Prima Gordon that I told you that says that someone who's not over the Zara, his wine is also, his bread is also also. There are things in there that imply that he means a Yisroel Mumar also, but I only have to say is that people who bring that Prima Gordon as a raya are not being 100% intellectually honest, because the first words of a Prima Gordon always are, as you know, is Ayin Shach. Right? That's the first words of the Prima Gordon. It's always Ayin Shach. It's a another of the Prima Gordon. He always starts with Ayin Shach or Ayin Magen Avraham. Right? So what does the Shach say? What does he say? Ayin Shach. The Shach is the one who said that if the guy is not over the Avodah Zarah, even if he's a guy who's not over the Avodah Zarah, his bread would be mutter. Kol shekin if he's a yid who's not over the Avodah Zarah. Right? So if you just say the Prima Gordon says that it's usher, you're forgetting to mention that he says Ayin Shach and the Shach says, you would think it yourself, but the Avinez even speaks it out, that the Shach is saying is, but if it's even a guy who's not over the Avodah Zarah, it's mutter. So he's culture came from a Yisroel Mumar. So he's not being 100%.
He wants to be more machmer by a Mumar, Yisroel Mumar, to stay away.
No. So the Prima Gordon does not do it. He's saying a guy who's not over the Avodah Zarah. And he sort of throws in about Yisroel Mumar also. So to say that the Prima Gordon says it without mentioning that the Shach said the other way is a little not intellectual. Okay, it's okay. But no, the Prima Gordon does give that implication. So what about in the contemporary, the more modern day poskim, the Chasnus and the Minchas Yitzchak are machmir about the Shaila, about Yisroel Mumar, whether it's Pash B'Yasser, and Rabbi Shechter goes with that shita. Rabbi Shechter is, I don't know if this is bad or good, but he's biased to the Avnei Nezer. Okay, he's a big fan of the Avnei Nezer, and others farm like that. So they are machmir, and Rav Moshe is mekel. As I mentioned, Rav Moshe is mekel. Rav Belsky also says very much that he's.
This is even by pass.
We're talking about pass.
I don't get it. Aren't we makel b'chlal about pasakum? So then what's the problem?
Pas palta.
So now, in later dinner, the next month we're going to talk about pas palta might be mutter. We're talking about the theoretical science to be pas palta. We're talking about whatever that includes. Whatever that
neighbor bakes you a cake.
Right.
But a neighbor. My neighbor is Muslim.
Perfect. They're not even over the Zara.
That's example.
They're not even over the Zara.
That's example in Kufchaf.
You don't got to worry about fats.
Okay. So now. I have to just tell you before we.
But the average for a person, the only person the average non-from person is a Mumar, right?
That's what we're right there. That's what we're headed. The last thing we have to just talk about. We have to talk about is that what I just said. All the things that we've been talking about, we have to make two. We have to make two. Yeah. We have to make two caveats. So we said two opposite statements about what we just said. Okay, they're gonna two opposite things. One is. The Binyan Tzin, the famous, I think it's the first shul maybe, the Binyan Tzin and Chasnus at the beginning of your day both say that those dinim of a Yisroel Mumar applies to a Yisroel Mumar who's being over Yisurim, he's Mechal Shabbos for Hesed or something like that. They do not apply to what we call, or what they didn't call, the Tinnik Shnishba. A kid who was brought up in a way that he never was exposed to Yiddishkeit. So his being Mechal Shabbos is not a rebellion, it's not a act of defiance. That person does not have the dinim of Yisroel Mumar. So for that, we wouldn't call that. So although Yisroel Mumar, the Chazanish holds is usher, his pass is usher, but most of the people who are not from are not Yisroel Mumar. Those people are just what we call a Tinnik Shnishba. Okay, so those it's not okay. Now.
Aruch LaNer says this?
Yeah.
Now I have to.
Binyan Tzin is Aruch LaNer.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I'm going to say the same thing in a drop of a different angle.
Yes, he was.
In a drop of a different angle is that we usually say the way we describe someone, the way we say when someone is a mumar is the barometer of whether someone is a mumar is whether he's Mechal Shabbos prefer Hesed. Okay. So first, as a side point is that the Chilul Shabbos has to be prefer Hesed. Okay. It has to be prefer Hesed.
That's always it.
Right. Now, Now, Rabbi Shechter says, what does that mean? That why is it Chilul Shabbos and why is it for Hesed? And Rabbi Shechter, the way he explains it, is that the reason for that is that a person
What are you saying?
will explain this. What a mummer? This mummer is a person's Chilul Shabbos for Hesed. Rabbi Shechter said it means it like this. Shmir Shabbos is something that all Yidden know what that is. Everybody knows what it means to be Shomer Shabbos. If you will be the person will be Mechal Shabbos, but not just be Mechal Shabbos, but do it in a public way. He's excluding himself from the community. He's like doing something that's clearly saying that I don't belong over here. I'm like walking away from everything, and therefore that person is Chazal say that person is Dina Kafir. So Chilul Shabbos for Hesed is a way of saying the person has shown that he has nothing to do with this anymore. He's like walked away. It's not because the Chomer of Chilul Shabbos. It's because it's such an obvious thing to do. Because.
No, I don't. It clearly says it's a Chomer of Chilul Shabbos.
Profaning Shabbos.
Okay. So Rabbi Shechter says.
Profaning
Rabbi Shechter says it.
the Maisa.
Okay, he says. Rabbi Shechter says if a person. Now this is a variation of what the Chasnus is saying. What being seen. A variation is if the person doesn't know what Chilul Shabbos is. To him, being Mechal Shabbos, to him, in his mind, being Jewish means going to shul on Yom Kippur. Okay, so in his mind, to him, being Mechal Shabbos for Hesed is not this rebellion of like, oh, I'm not going to be part of the Jewish people. It has nothing to do with it. He doesn't know beings from anything. He doesn't know anything. So this is a variation of what the Chasnus said. Okay, and
I think I knows already. He's informed of that.
So the Chasnus says, if you go over to a 30-year-old and you never know anything about Frumkai, you say that, do you know that God said that tomorrow you're not allowed to put on television? Okay? So then, the fact that's not considered that he now knows. He doesn't have enough background and enough basis to accept that piece of information. If I go to you and I say, you know...
a course for 3 years.
No, okay, so then if a person... So
the Rambam smash
okay, so it's very dependent. The question is, if he spends 30 years... If he spends 30 years... If he spends 30 years being educated in a certain direction, it could be that 3 years of classes is not yet enough to bring him in. Okay, but so it means is according to what we're saying so far, the rule of what someone will be is a mummer takes someone who has to have a certain amount of background. But now there's the opposite. The opposite. That this is so if you're keeping track, Rabbi Belsky was make about Rabbi Shechter was mocking about the parts of Yisroel Mumar, but he said that most people are not Mumar. Okay, so it's usually Mutter. And Rabbi Belsky, who said that the parts of Yisroel Mumar is Mutter, he says, but you have to realize the other side, which is that it's like Kamat, not Negea, because obviously the person who's not from, forget about if he's a Mumar, even if he's just a Tinnik Shanishba, he has no nemanis about Kashrus issues. So if you have a company and there's 12 employees and one of them is a non-from Yid, so you can't trust and say he's going to light the fires because he has no nemanis for Kashrus. Not because his cooking won't be Pasach. His cooking will be Pas Yisrael. But you can't trust him. If he's out sick, he's not going to say no baking today. He's out sick, so somebody else will light the fire for him. So there's even though his pas might be Pas Yisrael, but you can't practically in the company you're not going to be able to rely on him.
There's no nemanis.
And he said, so that means that the Shiloh gets now more focused.
In Aruch it talks about that if it comes, since it comes from a Yid's house, so if the guy lit up, obviously somebody came by and threw something in there.
No, but we're talking about that in this bakery. There's one non from Yid who works here. He's going to be in charge of the baking. He can be in charge of the baking because he has no nemonah to take that job responsibly. But so as Elma, you're going to tell me that we're talking about that there's someone in your house. Okay, you have a 97-year-old Russian babysitter in your house who she's not from. Okay, so she's a Yisroel Mumar or she's a Tinnik Shanishba and she's not from. So you say this, so she's doing the cooking and she's doing the cooking in the house. So they tell me that for her cooking is this Shiloh of a Yisroel Mumar or maybe Tinnik Shanishba should be mutter. But then, and we won't get into this, you get into the halachos from Kuf Yuches, which is you're not allowed to leave a person like that. The same kind of a thing that person is not allowed to be left alone with your condition. But if you have your right, unless you'll have cases like Yitzhak. So it'll end up that the Shiloh is very limited. The Shiloh is, you can't come in once a month. No, you can't come once a month. No, that's not true.
I got a phone call today.
It's a Beferish that that's not true. No, it's a Beferish that it's not true. And why are we doing companies in its own parsha?
That's why it's called Yud.
Let's go have some room.
No, it's a completely different thing. But so it comes out that the Shiloh is going to get into a very specific case. you have a person that the only person who could be cooking possibly is that person.
Like the Russian cooking.
Like in the cooking, you have the cooking yeshiva. You have the yeshiva has a cooking. There are people in and out, and the person is potentially a mumar, and you don't have chashnus of making trade like he's cooking in the yeshiva kitchen,
Right.
and someone's in and out all the time. Okay, I'm just saying, but
That's the case.
these two things are very limiting the whole shiloh to us because between the tinik shnishba, which makes most people not mumrim, and between the fact that you can't trust the guy anyhow, makes the shiloh more limited. But it's a shiloh. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Nice. 10 o'clock.